Hello everyone, welcome back to Dugout Daily. I'm Charlie and today we have another video. This time we are reviewing round 14 of the 2023 F1 season where we were at Circuit Zandvoort for the 2023 Dutch Grand Prix. Before we get going, make sure to like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel, hit the Apex the F1 channel and at MCFC Hibs on Twitter. We will start on Friday then, and of course in practice 1 where Verstappen led Alonso and Hamilton in opening practice session in Zandvoort. Max Verstappen set the early pace of Formula One's return from its summer break, with a home favourite topping the timesheets in the opening practice in Zandvoort, ahead of his pacey rivals Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton. Following 3 weeks off from racing, the drivers returned to action as they kick-started the second half of the season. They were greeted by clear blue skies, warm temperatures and packed grandstands filled with passionate fans. And as the green light illuminated for the start of the session, the drivers, led out by Kevin Magnussen, fresh from agreeing an extension with Haas, made their way out onto a very dusty track, with many looking to gather intel on their new upgrades. After winning all 12 races before the summer break, Red Bull returned to action with a limited update this weekend, while Ferrari reported no changes. However, their rivals, including McLaren, Mercedes and Aston Martin, all brought out bigger updates on their cars. Plenty of drivers bolted on the hard tyres, while a few ran the mediums in the early stages, with home favourite Verstappen, who was met with cheers at each corner of the track, setting the early pace. His nearest rival Lewis Hamilton over 6 tenths behind. Aston Martin, however, waited 20 minutes before going out on track, but all was not well. While Fernando Alonso was going round the circuit, it was bad news on the other side of the garage, with Lance Stroll told to box due to a suspected power unit issue. One by one, the drivers began to strap on a set of the soft tyres to set some fast laps, with Sergio Perez setting the quickest time. However, the red flags then waved after Nico Hülkenberg spun through the gravel and into the barrier at turn 14. Once the action resumed with 11 minutes left in the session, it was Verstappen who ran through the gravel at turn 12 at the end of practice, who vaulted to the top of the timesheets with a time of 1 minute 11.852 seconds, leading Alonso by 0.278 seconds. Hamilton was the driver to suffer from Hülkenberg's off, as he was forced to abort a quick lap under the yellow flags, but he wound up third for Mercedes ahead of the other Red Bull of Perez in fourth. It was an impressive first hour of running for Williams, with Alex Albon and Logan Sargent setting the 5th and 7th fastest times, with the McLaren of Lando Norris sandwiched between the pair in 6th, with his teammate Oscar Piastri in 8th. AlphaTauri were another team to bring upgrades to the track, with Yuki Tsunoda seen with a set of aero rakes fitted onto his car in the early stages, and the Japanese racer was 9th ahead of his teammate Daniel Ricciardo, who was down in 13th. Between the AlphaTauri drivers were the Alpine pair of Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly in 10th and 12th, with George Russell in the other Mercedes encountering traffic on his fast lap, leaving him down in 11th. Magnussen wound up 14th for Haas ahead of the Alfa Romeos of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu in 15th and 17th, although they did not run the soft tyre in the session. Another team that didn't run the soft tyre was Ferrari, with Charles Leclerc going 16th, while reserve driver Robert Schwartzman, filling in for Carlos Sainz in this session, was down in 19th. Hülkenberg and Stroll were not able to come out on track again and finished 18th and 20th. The drivers and their teams will now chew over the data from the session and prepare themselves for the second practice later today on Friday at 4 p.m. local time. We will move to practice 2 then, where Norris led Verstappen at Zandvoort after Piastri and Ricciardo crashed out. Lando Norris edged out Max Verstappen to set the pace during Friday's second practice session for the Dutch Grand Prix, which was red flagged in the early stages following an unusual double crash involving teammate Oscar Piastri and Daniel Ricciardo. Just under 10 minutes into the hour outing around the twisty Zandvoort circuit, Piastri dramatically lost control of his McLaren exiting turn 2 and slid into the barriers on the outside of the bank turn 3, causing significant front end damage. Moments after Piastri's shunt, returning AlphaTauri driver Ricciardo approached the section at full speed, and with his fellow Australian sitting in the middle of the racing line, there was nothing he could do to avoid hitting the wall himself. Neither driver could make it back to the pits, meaning their sessions were over there and then, with further concerns surrounding Ricciardo as replays showed his hands being thrown around in the cockpit due to him still holding the steering wheel upon impact. After the mess was cleared up, drivers made the switch to the soft compound tyre and times began to tumble, with the impressive Norris stepping forward to set the benchmark on a 1 minute 11.33 second lap, a lap strong enough to keep P1 despite two efforts from home favourite Verstappen. Verstappen wound up 0.023 seconds adrift, having survived a snap exiting turn 3 on his first soft shot effort, and then complained over the radio that his RB19 was doing some weird things in the medium speed corners. Alex Albon was a high flying third for Williams, finishing a couple of tenths further back, with Mercedes' Lewis Hamilton, AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda, and Alpine's Pierre Gasly, ensuring that 6 different teams filled the top 6. 7th went to the other Red Bull of Sergio Perez, who lapped almost half a second slower than teammate Verstappen, with Lance Stroll 8th in his Aston Martin after bouncing back from a power unit issue aboard his Aston Martin in FP1. Alfa Romeo's Valtteri Bottas and Aston Martin's Fernando Alonso rounded out the top 10, with both Ferraris absent from the leading half of the field as Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz finished a low-key 11th and 16th. Via a couple of trips through the gravel for the Spaniard. Williams' Rocky Logan Sargent placed 12th, pipping the Alpine of Esteban Ocon, Mercedes of George Russell, and Alfa Romeo of Zhou Guanyu, with newly re-signed Haas pair Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg 17th and 18th, the latter frustrating Verstappen by getting in his way early on. Piastri and Ricciardo brought up the rear without representative lap times following their early crashes, which will leave McLaren and AlphaTauri with work to do overnight to make repairs for final practice on Saturday morning. Drivers and teams will now regroup and dig through the data before returning to the track for that aforementioned FP3 session at 11:30 local time on Saturday, with the all-important qualifying hour scheduled for 3 p.m. We will move to practice 3 then, where Verstappen led Russell and Perez in rain-hampered final practice session in Zandvoort. Max Verstappen set the pace in the final practice hour in Zandvoort as the home favourite mastered the wet conditions to top the timesheets ahead of George Russell and his teammate Sergio Perez. The drivers ran in hot and humid conditions on Friday, but they were greeted by a wet track on Saturday morning as heavy rain hit the circuit right before the session got underway, with more arriving during FP3. As the session got underway and the drivers began to filter out onto the track, the sun began to shine through. However, track conditions were still wet, with both Red Bulls in Verstappen and Perez, as well as Lando Norris ending up off track. The session was then red flagged when Kevin Magnussen spun into the barrier at turn 3, with the Dane coming on the radio to immediately apologise to his Haas team. That signalled a difficult start to the day for Haas following Nico Hülkenberg's crash in FP1 on Friday. After a 7-minute delay, the drivers went back out on track, with Verstappen going fastest, leading Norris by over a second and a half. However, there was another red flag as Zhou Guanyu beached his Alfa Romeo in the gravel at the final corner. Once the action restarted, McLaren's Oscar Piastri and Norris began to swap fastest times before the session was once again red flagged. Liam Lawson, filling in for Daniel Ricciardo after the Australian broke a bone in his hand after his crash in FP2, spun his AlphaTauri into the barrier at turn 14, and despite damage to his front wing, he was able to continue on into the pits. With 8 minutes remaining following the session's resumption, the drivers came out for their final laps before qualifying, and it was Verstappen who eventually went to the top of the timesheets, leading Russell by 0.379 seconds. Verstappen's Red Bull teammate Perez left it late to go third, going ahead of the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso in fourth, as the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton went up to P5, also on his final attempt of the session. Alex Albon picked up where he left off on Friday to go sixth for Williams, ahead of McLaren's Piastri, who recovered from his crash in FP2 to finish seventh. Valtteri Bottas also impressed as he went eighth for Alfa Romeo. Charles Leclerc recovered from his multiple off-track excursions at Turn 1 to set the ninth fastest time for Ferrari, with Norris rounding out the top 10 for McLaren. Pierre Gasly was 11th for Alpine, ahead of the other Ferrari, Carlos Sainz, who also had problems at Turn 1, with Yuki Tsunoda in 13th for AlphaTauri and Williams' Logan Sargent in 14th. Hulkenberg wound up 15th for Haas, while Esteban Ocon soldiered on after his collision with the barrier at Turn 1, but was down in 16th for Alpine, with Lance Stroll in 17th for Aston Martin. Lawson was also able to continue on after his meeting with the barrier, but found himself down in 18th, with Zhou Guanyu and Kevin Magnussen at the bottom of the field after their sessions ended early. The drivers will now look over the data with their teams, debrief and get themselves ready for qualifying later today at 3 p.m. local time. We will move to qualifying then, where Verstappen topped a dramatic wet-dry Zandvoort qualifying to extend run of Dutch Grand Prix poles. Max Verstappen made it 3 poles in a row at the Dutch Grand Prix, with another imperious display during Saturday's qualifying session at Zandvoort, pulling out a stupendous final lap to beat Lando Norris and George Russell at the end of a crash-filled wet-to-dry affair. In the dying moments of a pole shootout that was red flagged twice due to crashes for Williams rookie Logan Sargent and Ferrari driver Charles Leclerc, the passionate home crowd was sent wild by Verstappen's ultimate table-topping time of 1 minute 10.567 seconds. That puts him a whopping half a second clear of his nearest rivals, the McLaren of Norris and Mercedes of Russell, who led the Silver Arrows charge after teammate Lewis Hamilton suffered a shock Q2 elimination. Alex Albon was another star of qualifying as he put his Williams up in fourth, ahead of Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin, Carlos Sainz Ferrari, and the other Red Bull Sergio Perez, who was 1.3 seconds slower than Verstappen. Oscar Piastri had been in the hunt for a maiden F1 pole, but dropped down the timesheets during the final laps, leaving him 8th on the grid in front of Leclerc and Sargent, who watched the rest of Q3 from the sidelines after their shunts. Hamilton had to settle for 13th after his aforementioned Q2 exit, slotting behind Lance Stroll's Aston Martin and the lead Alpine Pierre Gasly, leaving the 7-time world champion with a challenging recovery drive at the tight, twisty Dutch venue. Yuki Tsunoda followed in 14th, with stewards set to investigate a potential impeding incident between the AlphaTauri man and Hamilton after the session, while Nico Hulkenberg was the slowest of the Q2 runners en route to 15th. Alfa Romeo lost both cars at the first qualifying hurdle, with Zhou Guanyu, having spun out of FP3 earlier in the day, narrowly missed the cut in 16th via a slide through the penultimate corner, with teammate Bottas all the way back in 19th. Esteban Ocon was a lowly 17th in the other Alpine, having lost out with the timing of his final run, while Haas driver Kevin Magnussen, who had a crash of his own in final practice, went too deep at Turn 1 on his final run and wound up 18th. Liam Lawson marked his first qualifying session with 20th and last, a second adrift of the pack after the young New Zealander was thrown in at the deep end as the replacement for the injured Daniel Ricciardo with just an hour of practice in wet conditions. So as it happened then in Q1, Albon starred as qualifying begins amid wet conditions. After a dry start to the weekend at Zandvoort, the heavens opened and drenched the circuit on Saturday morning to deliver a wet and wild final practice session, with slippery conditions sticking around for the start of qualifying, albeit the sun now breaking through the clouds. As Q1 got underway, intermediates were the tyre of choice to deal with the sodden track surface, leading to a flurry of early laps as drivers built built up confidence and attempted to post some banker laps in the event of further showers hitting the venue. Albon, Hulkenberg and home favourite Verstappen all took trips through the gravel early on, prompting the reigning double world champion to send a sweary radio message to engineer Gianpiero Lambiase on the Red Bull pit wall saying, "Mate, what the fuck is going on with the car?" Once all 20 drivers had got a lap on the board, it was Norris who led the way on a 1 minute 23.26 second lap, just under half a second clear of teammate Piastri, as McLaren continued to display impressive pace around the tight, twisty layout despite the change from dry to wet weather. A host of green and purple sector times followed as the session entered its final 10 minutes, with drivers gaining more and more confidence and the track gradually drying up, bringing a host of different pace setters while the clock ticked down. With just over 5 minutes to run, Verstappen held P1 on a 1 minute 21.23 second lap ahead of Piastri, Norris, Russell and Alonso, while at the other end of the timesheets, Hulkenberg, debutant Lawson, Bottas, Magnussen and Sargent were all in the drop zone as warnings were sent to drivers that more rain was on the way. In and around the times being posted, replay showed a couple of close calls, with Hamilton appearing to get balked by Stroll as he closed out a lap and Piastri having to take to the grass to avoid a collision with Sainz, who had just left the pit lane. Both incidents set to be looked at post-qualifying. A final sequence of laps, Red Bull and Mercedes sticking with their initial set of intermediates rather than pitting for fresh rubber, brought further changes to the order, at the end of which an inspired Albon topped the times via a 1 minute 20.939 second lap, followed by Verstappen, Piastri, Norris and Sainz. Russell was the lead Mercedes driver in sixth, as Stroll, Gasly, Tsunoda and Alonso rounded out the top 10 from Hulkenberg, Hamilton and Perez, as Leclerc and Sargent squeezed through to the second phase of qualifying. Alfa Romeo suffered a double Q1 exit in the wet conditions, Zhou sliding his way to 16th and Bottas taking a disappointing 19th, with a pair split by Ocon and Magnussen, with the latter's efforts hurt by a trip to the runoff at turn 1 as Lawson brought up the rear in the first qualifying session of his F1 career. So knocked out in Q1 then was Zhou, Ocon, Magnussen, Bottas and Lawson. In Q2, Hamilton suffered a shock elimination as the track dried up. "Is there more rain coming?" Verstappen asked as he lined up at the end of the pit lane for the start of Q2, with a mixture of dark and light clouds still covering the track, to which his engineer responded that another band of rain could hit the track. Intermediates were still the tyres to be on as the second phase began, with Norris and Verstappen again trading fastest times, the Red Bull driver working his way down to a time of 1 minute 20.282 seconds to lead the McLaren by 0.347 seconds. Hamilton held third from Albon, Russell and Leclerc, with Piastri, Stroll, Alonso and Sargent holding the final Q3 spots, meaning Perez, Tsunoda, Hulkenberg, Gasly and Sainz were in the drop zone as drivers pondered whether to stay out on their starting intermediates or pit for new ones. Albon starred once again as Q2 reached its crunch point, clocking a 1 minute 19.399 second lap to slot into P1, but a final flurry of laps with most drivers having pitted for fresh intermediates saw Verstappen take over at the top thanks to a rapid 1 minute 18.856 second lap. Third still represented another excellent showing for Albon as he slotted behind Piastri, with Alonso, Leclerc and Russell rounding out the top 6 from Norris, Perez, Sainz and Sargent, who made it into Q3 for the first time in his F1 career. That meant a painful Q2 exit for Hamilton, whose early final run on an ever-drying track surface saw him tumble down the order to 13th, behind Stroll and Gasly and ahead of Tsunoda and Hulkenberg. Stewards are set to look into potential impeding involving Hamilton and Tsunoda post-session. So knocked out in Q2 with Stroll, Gasly, Hamilton, Tsunoda and Hulkenberg. And in Q3, Verstappen created more magic on home soil. All eyes were on the tyre blankets ahead of Q3 underway, and when mechanics removed them from the 10 remaining cars, it was revealed that Albon, Russell, Sainz and Sargent would start the final segment on softs, with everyone else on intermediates. That slick tyre gamble would soon backfire for Sargent, though, with the Williams driver losing control of his car at the still damp entry to the high-speed turn 2 and slamming into the barriers, prompting an apology from the American as he confirmed that he was unharmed. Following a delay for barrier repairs, and with just over 8 minutes on the clock, all drivers by the sideline, Sargent headed back out on slick tyres, prompting another wave of green and purple sector times in the hunt for pole position. On a much clearer dry line, Norris pumped in a 1 minute 12.049 second lap to fly to the top of the order, a couple of attempts up on teammate Piastri, with Verstappen's first lap only good enough for third, just before Leclerc brought out another red flag with a violent off at turn 9. That sets up a final dash for pole when the session resumed with 4 minutes remaining, and Verstappen used the opportunity masterfully by getting down to a stunning time of 1 minute 10.567 seconds and moving more than half a second clear of the field. Norris held on for a spot on the front row, followed by Russell, the charging Albon and Alonso, with Sainz, Perez, Piastri and the sideline pair of Leclerc and Sargent rounding out the Q3 order and top 10 grid positions for Sunday's race. Verstappen said after qualifying then it was a very tricky qualifying, starting of course with the intermediates, but also the track surface was quite slippery with the new tarmac. It was all about putting your laps in, but also staying out of trouble. I think we managed that quite well, but then also at the end when we could go onto the slick tyres where it was one dry line in some places, we had to risk it a bit, but that last lap was very enjoyable. So the drivers will now debrief with their teams and ready themselves for Sunday's Dutch Grand Prix, which is scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. local time. We will move to the race then, where Verstappen overcomes wet weather chaos to make it a hat-trick of Dutch Grand Prix wins and equal Vettel's victory record. Max Verstappen converted pole position into victory at the Dutch Grand Prix for the third year in a row, navigating an action-packed, rain-hit encounter to take the checkered flag ahead of Fernando Alonso and Pierre Gasly and draw level with Sebastian Vettel on 9 successive F1 wins. It all began with spits of rain before the start of the race that dramatically turned into a shower on the first lap, prompting split strategies up and down the order as Verstappen headed a pack of drivers who initially stayed out on slicks, and teammate Perez led a group into the pits to take on intermediates. What followed was a frantic opening phase as those who made an early switch to intermediates rose to the fore, while those who stayed out longer on slicks lost a hatful of positions prior to the rain easing off and the track gradually drying up. With the Red Bulls running those aforementioned alternate strategies, it was Perez who led the way as the race settled down, while Verstappen had fallen back to fourth behind Zhou Guanyu and Gasly and had work to do to reclaim P1. After managing to do so with much superior pace, Verstappen looked set for a clear run to the checkered flag and the win on a bone-dry track, only for further rain to work its way onto the radar and hit the track with force in the closing stages. That led to another flurry of pit lane activity and a red flag after Zhou crashed out, bringing a 7-lap dash to the flag when the action resumed and serving up one last test for the reigning double world champion Verstappen to overcome. Overcome it Verstappen did, and he kept his cool at the slippery restart and managed the gap back to Alonso and Perez with aplomb, confirming his hard-fought triumph and equaling Vettel's victory record that has stood since 2013. Alonso's second-place finish marked his first podium since Canada more than 2 months ago, while Perez crossed the line in first but was hit with a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, promoting a delighted Gasly who started 12th to the rostrum. Perez had to settle for fourth after his sanction, following followed by the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz and Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton, who were involved in a late wheel-banging scrap as Lando Norris, Alex Albon, Oscar Piastri and Esteban Ocon completed the points. Lance Stroll just missed out on a top 10 finish in the other Aston Martin, followed by Nico Hulkenberg, F1 newcomer Liam Lawson and Kevin Magnussen, the AlphaTauri driver given a 10-second penalty for impeding the Dane in the pit lane. That moment aside, it was a strong debut performance for the 21-year-old New Zealander, who otherwise stayed out of trouble and kept his car on the track, finishing 3 spots up on teammate Yuki Tsunoda, who took a 5-second penalty of his own for causing a collision with George Russell. Valtteri Bottas was the only Alfa Romeo to finish after Zhou's crash, taking 15 from Tsunoda and Russell, the latter losing what would have been a points finish after contact with Norris during the final dash to the flag. Joining Zhou on the sidelines with Charles Leclerc due to damage picked up on the first lap that ultimately proved too challenging to race on with, and Logan Sargent, who followed up his qualifying crash with another heavy shunt. So as it happened then, after a rain-affected final practice and qualifying, all eyes were on the skies as the F1 paddock returned to Zandvoort for race day, with early showers clearing to leave a dry track ahead of the start, albeit dark clouds still lingering above the Dutch venue. A couple of changes to the starting order saw Tsunoda demoted from 14th to 17th, promoting Hulkenberg, Zhou and Ocon for impeding Hamilton in qualifying, and Magnussen moved from 18th to the pit lane via a host of power unit and gearbox changes. That meant a spot gained for F1 debutant Lawson, who was thrown in at the deep end in place of the injured Daniel Ricciardo at AlphaTauri and qualified last. The 21-year-old New Zealander getting himself strapped in for 72 demanding laps with limited wet running under his belt. Shortly before lights out, with spits of rain in the air, it was revealed that 18 of the 20 drivers would be starting the race on soft compound tyres, Hamilton and Hulkenberg bucking the trend by opting for the medium tyre. When the action began, pole sitter Verstappen made a clean getaway to retain his advantage into turn 1, slotting in front of Norris, Albon, Russell and Alonso, before the latter pulled a brilliant double move on the 2 British racers on the low line at the bank turn 3. But the spits of rain suddenly turned into a full-blown shower, with Perez, Leclerc, Gasly, Zhou, Tsunoda, Lawson and Magnussen pitting immediately to swap their slicks for intermediates. Ferrari caught out as they scrambled to get their tyres ready. If you can live with it, stay out, was the message to Verstappen, before being told to prepare to pit a few seconds later as the home favourite crawled around in front of Alonso, who had also got the jump on Norris, with Russell holding 4 from Albon and Sainz. With the majority of drivers having pitted to swap tyres, Russell, Norris, Albon, Piastri, Stroll, Bottas, Hulkenberg, Hamilton and Sargent stayed out on slicks for another lap, with the intermediate runners charging their way through the field and Perez soon moving into the lead. By lap 3, only Russell, Albon, Piastri, Stroll, Bottas, Hulkenberg and Sargent were still running slicks, tumbling down the order in the process, leaving Perez with a 12-second advantage over Zhou, Gasly and the pole-sitting Verstappen. Verstappen was on a charge, though, clearing Gasly and Zhou in quick succession to climb back up to P2 and set his sights on teammate Perez, who sat some 10 seconds clear after his inspired early pit call. With the dust settling on that drama, it was now a Red Bull 1-2 at the front, with Verstappen rapidly closing on Perez as Zhou sat third from Gasly, Alonso and Sainz, the Spaniard managing to clear teammate Leclerc, who was struggling with some front wing damage, picked up in first lap contact with Piastri. Tsunoda held 8th despite a slow pit stop, while Magnussen highlighted just how much ground could be gained in the tricky conditions as he rose from the pit lane to run 9th, with Norris in the final points paying position. There were second stops for Magnussen, Hamilton, and Stroll on lap 11, however, as they swapped back to slicks from intermediates, despite Russell being told that another shower was due to hit the track in a matter of minutes. With Piastri, one of the drivers, to stay out on his starting set of softs, lighting up the timing screens as the track gradually dried up. It was not long before the rest of the field traded their overheating intermediates for slicks. Crucially, Verstappen pitted a lap earlier than Perez on the 12th lap to overhaul his teammate in the pit lane, prompting some questions from the Mexican on the radio as he settled into second, some 3 seconds adrift. Just as the race was settling down again, despite further spits of rain, Sargent lost control of his Williams at the exit of turn 8 and slammed into the barriers, prompting a virtual safety car and then a full safety car as the shaken American radioed his confusion at what had happened. As the field arrived at the rear of Bird Minelander's Aston Martin, the top 10 order was Verstappen, Perez, Alonso, Gasly, Sainz, Zhou, Magnussen, Albon, the only driver yet to pit, Ocon and Tsunoda. Gasly clearing Sainz down the start-finish straight after his stop, but then being given a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pits. Norris found himself in 11th after starting on the front row, followed by Leclerc, Hamilton and Piastri, who'd stopped for a second set of softs, with Russell only 18th and lamenting, "How did we mess this up?" over the radio, prompting another stop to Hards and seemingly an attempt to reach the checkered flag without another stop, weather permitting. With 21 of the scheduled 72 laps down, the safety car peeled in and the race resumed. Verstappen nailing the restart to hold on to his lead while Perez defended boldly from Alonso, and Gasly did just enough to keep Sainz behind him. A moment for Piastri saw him fall behind Bottas and drop to 15th, while Albon found a way past Magnussen for P7 after a scary moment on the start-finish straight where the Williams man was less than amused by the hash change of direction to initially hold position, leading to the Dane being given a black and white flag. The action continued to come thick and fast over the following laps as Ocon got the jump on Magnussen, Tsunoda and Zhou, while Piastri made up for his mistake to reclaim P14 from Bottas into turn 1 before both the Australian and Hamilton dispatched Leclerc. By lap 27, Verstappen's lead over teammate Perez was up to 3 seconds, with Alonso still running in third from Gasly, Sainz and Albon, who had Ocon rapidly closing on him, as Tsunoda another to be given a black and white flag, and Norris for a remove on Magnussen rounded out the points. Darker clouds are coming in, reported Verstappen as the race then edged towards its halfway mark, before a similar message went in Leclerc's direction, confirming that further spots of rain and another shower were making their way towards the track. A couple more changes to the top 10 positions came when Norris and Hamilton both found a way past Zhou, while Magnussen's demise continued as he dropped back to 13th, ahead of teammate Hülkenberg, Haas again struggling for race pace. As the race hit the 40-lap mark, Verstappen led Perez by almost 7 seconds, with Alonso 4 seconds further back in third, as Gasly ploughed on in fourth with his time penalty hanging over him, ahead of Sainz and Albon. Further back, there was some brilliant wheel-to-wheel action between Leclerc and debutant Lawson, who traded positions on several occasions, only for Ferrari to call the Monegasque into the pits to retire shortly afterwards due to floor damage. Norris and Sainz kicked off the next sequence of pit stops on lap 43 and 44 before Albon finally ditched his starting set of softs on lap 45, as attention then turned to when Verstappen and the rest of the front runners would come in. While Perez boxed on lap 46, leader Verstappen extended his stint for 4 more laps, with no dramas for either Red Bull driver, but the same could not be said for Alonso, who lost out to Sainz due to a sticky front left tyre. After those stops, Verstappen still led comfortably from Perez, with Sainz now holding the final podium spot, ahead of a recovering Alonso, Gasly, Tsunoda and Russell, who gained plenty of spots after his early switch to hard tyres. tyres. Albon was still in the points in P8 along with Ocon and Norris. It didn't take Alonso long to recover P3, breezing past Sainz down the start-finish straight, with Russell doing the same on Tsunoda a few moments later to rise to 6th and set about catching 5th place. Tsunoda would soon drop out the points, falling behind Ocon and Norris, as the Japanese racer reported damage over the radio and stewards confirmed they were looking into an incident involving him and Russell. With around 15 laps remaining, Verstappen was told that more rain could arrive in the final 10 minutes, some of which could be heavy, while Hamilton made progress in the other Mercedes to pass Norris and Ocon for P8. Hamilton soon arrived on teammate Russell's tail, with the younger Briton moving aside after saving a huge slide through the high-speed sweeps, as Gasly got the jump on Sainz around the outside of Turn 1 to move up to 4th. On lap 61, the predicted rain suddenly arrived, prompting the majority of the field to immediately dive into the pits and swap their slick tyres for intermediates. Verstappen, Alonso, Albon and Ocon, the front runners, to stay out longer. Following the stops, with Ocon the only driver to take on full wets, Verstappen remained in P1 from Perez, only for his teammate to go too deep at Turn 1, suffer a half spin and lightly touch the barrier, allowing Alonso to slip ahead. With the rain lashing down, Zhou slid off the track approaching Turn 1 and brought out the virtual safety car, prompting the Red Bull pair to pit for full wet tyres. Perez brushing the pit wall in the process just before the VSC turned into a red flag on lap 65. That looked set to prove costly for Perez, who was in the pit lane when the red flag came out and dropped down to 6th on the timing screens, behind Gasly, Sainz and Hamilton, who also had a moment at Turn 1 when he skated through the gravel. However, a message from race control stated that Perez would be third in the restart order behind Verstappen and Alonso, with Gasly set to filter in 4th from Sainz, Hamilton, Norris, Russell, Albon and Piastri. Separate bulletins confirmed a 5-second time penalty for Tsunoda for causing an incident with Russell and a 10-second sanction for AlphaTauri teammate Lawson due to unnecessarily impeding Magnussen in the pit lane. After a 40-minute delay, the remaining 17 drivers headed back out on mandated intermediate tyres for a rolling start and 2 laps behind the safety car, after which Verstappen controlled proceedings to retain the lead over Alonso and Perez. There will be further drama for Perez, though, with stewards handing him a 5-second penalty for speeding in the pit lane, while Russell briefly managed to get ahead of Norris and run P7, only for the pair to collide and the Mercedes man to pick up terminal damage. With 3 laps to run, Verstappen led Alonso by 1.2 seconds, with Perez a second further back in 3rd, but Gasly looked set to profit from the aforementioned penalty in 4th, ahead of Sainz, Hamilton, Norris, Albon, Piastri and Ocon. Despite everything that was thrown his way and the pressure of the home crowd lining the track all weekend long, there would be no stopping Verstappen as he chalked up a record-equaling 9th straight win and 11th from 13 races so far this season. Alonso held on for 2nd, bagging the Driver of the Day award in the process, while Perez's penalty promoted Gasly to 3rd in his first full podium of the season, having finished 3rd in the sprint race at Spa-Francorchamps last time out. Sainz beat Hamilton to 5th after a close battle in the closing laps, while McLaren duo Norris and Piastri sandwiched the Williams of Albon and Ocon, rounding out the points, giving Alpine a welcome double points finish after their recent managerial changes. Stroll was unable to emulate 2-time world champion teammate Alonso as he came home 11th, followed by Hülkenberg, Lawson and Magnussen, F1's newest driver, building up useful experience ahead of what could be another outing at Monza. After the checkered flag, another note from race control confirmed that Magnussen was under investigation over a potential restart infringement, meaning the Haas man may well be shifted down the order later in the evening. Bottas had a quiet race en route to 15th, with Tsunoda and Russell, the Mercedes driver, left to roue contact with Norris as they battled over 7th at the late restart, the final drivers to finish in 16th and 17th. Charles Leclerc and Sargent were the 3 drivers on the sidelines as the race drew to a close, thanks to the aforementioned crashes from the Alfa Romeo and Williams men and floor damage for the Ferrari. So Verstappen said after the race, it's incredible. Also today, they didn't make it easy for us with the weather to make all the time the right calls. I'm incredibly proud. I already had goosebumps, when they were playing the national anthem before the start. Even with all the bad weather, the rain, the fans were still going at it. So an incredible atmosphere. The next stop on the 2023 F1 calendar will be Monza for the Italian Grand Prix, which takes place the weekend after the Dutch Grand Prix from September the 1st to the 3rd. So that is it for this video then. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you are new around here. Dugout Daily, the football channel, hit the Apex the F1 channel, and at MCFC Hips on Twitter. Everybody, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care and goodbye.